Welcome back. It is Wednesday, July 16th, and you are in tune with Wednesday Night Live with your host, award-winning host, Ralph Lillig, coming to you from Pocatello, Idaho, gateway to the great Northwest. We have a number of things to cover with you tonight. We're going to do a bit of a reprise over what's been going on the last year, roughly, but it's going to be a quick reprise, most of it on the video, and I will just cover a few things here and there. But I wanted to tell you, by award-winning, I want you to know that I am the proud recipient of the Pink Brick, the Pocatello Pride Pink Brick Award, and this is awarded to, let me see if I can get all the words in here. It's awarded to the most hated, homophobic, bigoted, reviled, detested, contemptible, disdained, intolerant, unloving person in the community by the loving, tolerant, accepting, and transparent homosexual community. So, to those of you who felt the need to give me the award, thank you very much. This was only a local award. This was not the national award, so I really was not in competition with any big names. A lot of big names have received this. Arnold Schwarzenegger got the big one. The big one comes from San Francisco, and I guess that's the national award. Mine is only local, but suffice it to say that a number of people in the community think ill of me enough to make sure that I got this award. So thank you to my adoring fans. I read to you most of the comments last week, so I won't go through that whole thing again. Just a reminder before we get into the videos, I've shared this with you a number of times, and this came right out of this book that I've also shared with you many times, The Homosexualization of America by Dennis Altman. Dennis Altman is a homosexual activist. I've quoted a lot from him. I will, from time to time, quote from him again. This quote, though, I think is probably the single most important quote in his entire book. The greatest single victory of the gay movement over the past decade has been to shift the debate from behavior to identity, thus forcing opponents into a position where they can be seen as attacking the civil rights of homosexual citizens. And this, again, is from this book, The Homosexualization of America by activist Dennis Altman. Now, why do I share that with you? Well, among other things, I share that because the community here has been so boisterous, because they detest me to such a great degree. Well, let me show you what these loving and tolerant people have. I showed this to you last year. This is a picture that's a parody. It was from Tom Nestor's page earlier this year or last year, and this is meant to depict me in a coffin. The front of my face is burned, and a quick glance at this, as I shared with you last year, my granddaughter happened to go online and somehow found this on the blog sites, I guess, and it was quite shocking to her. She had a hard time with that. But that's from the loving, tolerant, non-hateful people of the LGBTQ community. And then, of course, the usual target, do away with Ralph Lillig kind of thing. So the fact that they took the time and effort and that I'm so much on their mind that they had to give me an award, I guess should give me a feeling of a special status, at least in the homosexual community. All right. This day in history, I had a whole bunch of things I wanted to share with you about this day in history, but it turns out we're going to take up quite a bit of time with video, so I'm just going to quickly share with you that, let's see, 1790, Washington, D.C. became the capital of the United States. The site was selected by George Washington, and the young American Congress declares that a swampy, humid, muddy, and mosquito-infested site on the Potomac River between Maryland and Virginia will be the nation's permanent capital. And it's interesting, mosquito-infested, and it still seems to be a place filled with bloodsuckers. Not much has changed over the last 200 years. 1945, on this day at 5:29:45 a.m., 1945, the Manhattan Project came to an explosive end as the first atom bomb is successfully tested in Alamogordo, New Mexico. When I was a boy and living in Las Vegas, mid-50s sometime, I was a paper boy, and about 5:30 in the morning on my paper route, very dark outside, and suddenly the entire world seemed to go into black and white, no color left. And as I looked up in apprehension, as you might imagine, the no color, not just features with shadows and all that. And off in the distance, and it's actually 80 miles from Las Vegas, at Jackass Flats outside of Las Vegas, there was a nuclear test. And I can tell you, from 80 miles away at 5:30 in the morning, whatever it was, it is an awesome spectacle. And I don't like to use that word because it's so overused. But seeing the atomic explosion in the middle of the night light up everything, never did hear the blast. The sound wave never hit me for some reason, not even a muffled anything. But I certainly saw the explosion. It was awe-inspiring, to say the least. You know, I almost forgot. I do this every week at this time, and I've been missing in action a couple of weeks. I've done a couple of replays for you because they were important, and I wanted to keep you updated. As you know, we filed a contest with the deputy prosecutor, or with the city prosecutor, county prosecutor's office, the deputy clerk. Actually, the contest was naming Robert Pilecki, who is the county clerk, and there have been interesting developments in that, but suffice it to say at this point, after 46 work days, so that's what, 9 weeks or something like that, 46 work days later, Vote Yes Pocatello representatives have still not received all of the information on the election returns. Now, you may recall when I spoke to you last time, you remember the night of the election, the Fair Pocatello folks won by 147 votes. By 4 or 5 in the morning, whatever it was, that had been dropped down to 80 votes. When we had the recount on the 27th, I think it was, that dropped down to 56 votes. And as I told you then, you should be very concerned, if not alarmed, that the process is so flawed that it would drop from 147 votes to 56. And I am convinced that if we had all of the documents, we would probably find enough to overturn this. But apparently we're not going to get those documents. And I think it's something that you should also be considering. Certainly I have, because I've unfortunately been in the thick of this thing. A government who is so bent on not letting you get information that you, meaning me and you, as public citizens have the right to, on public information that is supposed to be available to anybody who wants it, that has to do with our process of electing people or on deciding on issues. If the system is so flawed that there's a 63 or 64% difference from election night to several weeks later, and it's so flawed that you as common citizens try to get information about it, and all you find is foot dragging and obfuscation by the very people who we hire or we elect to represent us, that should be of great concern to all of us. The government is supposed to serve us, and I know Mr. Pilecki made not Mr. Pilecki, sorry, Mr. Service, Ian Service, made a comment that it's not his job to represent me as an attorney. And of course that's true, but it is his job to represent all of us in the prosecutor's office and to be transparent when we come to him or any other part of the elected officials with what we feel as voting citizens is a problem, where we need information from our government and all we get is stonewalling, which is what we've had here. That should be of concern to all of us. There's something very wrong with the system, very wrong with the people who are running the system, if they're working this hard to keep us from getting the information. Now, I know the Fair Pocatello people are very happy because they win. That was their whole objective. They spent $156,000 to win against about $15,000 to $16,000 from Vote Yes Pocatello. Vote Yes Pocatello spent $3,900 on the recount, and unfortunately we don't have the resources that Fair Pocatello has. So it's unlikely that you and I will ever know the truth. And I tell you that quite honestly because I don't believe we have yet learned the truth. We've gotten pieces of it, but obviously we're apparently not going to get the whole thing. So that's kind of an update. Quite frankly, I'm hoping to get this done with, put this behind us tonight. So unless the Fair Pocatello people or the homosexual community with their various spokesman people, Chris Cole from Channel 8, although he doesn't usually speak as Chris Cole when he's condemning me, he usually speaks as Christopher Stevens. which is Christopher Stevens Cole is his full name. And Chris, you need to be careful when the reporter becomes the reported. When you become part of the story, there's a problem. And that may be a problem that you won't want to have to talk about when you seek employment at another station when your contract is up, if they don't renew this. Just a word to the wise for whatever you think it's worth. So all of this talk on the internet that may not get on the camera necessarily is still public information. And one needs to be very careful about becoming part of the story if one is going to be reporting on the story. Okay, so I've got a letter I wanted to share with you. This is a little bit dated, but it was such a well done letter I wanted to share it with you. And I think we could probably squeeze this in. This was about the GOP convention. Remember all that stuff? There's been a lot of snarky stuff in the paper on the so-called conservative websites, the establishment websites as I would portray them, about the convention and all of the things that happened. Well, here's kind of a different perspective on that. This is actually from July 16th, so it's not that old. Take it back, it's not that old at all. It's today. I was looking at this without my glasses. I thought June 16th, July 16th, GOP convention, and this is in the Idaho State Journal letters section. A big deal has been made by the Democrats since the chaotic Republican convention in Moscow, suggesting that they are way forward for the citizens of Idaho. What they offer, though, is the difference between a simple case of measles or contracting Ebola virus. Not only do Idaho Democrats leave in their official platform the old, failed policy pitting the proletariat against the bourgeois as they declare themselves for social and economic justice, but they proudly proclaim their complete ignorance of economics by supporting any and all minimum wage policies and legislation. Any American states or cities that have been under Democrat governance for multiple decades, think Illinois, California, Detroit, and Washington, D.C., are so crippled with crime and constituent dependency that they are effectively on life support. To give Democrats control of Idaho would be to assure that our state eventually joins the ranks of our sick and dying neighbors. It's in their DNA. But worst of all, an existential sibling connection binds the Idaho Democrats to their national party. You know, the political party being led by a guy who is actively dismantling this country from the inside. The party gutting our military, shredding our Constitution, abusing citizens through government agencies, killing jobs, job-creating industries by onerous regulation, destroying our abilities and stature as a world power, and eviscerating our currency, which concurrently annihilates the American middle class. Oh, and did I mention that this party has also essentially erased our borders, and millions will be added to the rolls of our educational, medical, and social services soon. As a matter of familial loyalty, Idaho Democrats will assuredly support this program of national suicide. By contrast, Republicans are relatively harmless, even with their Detective Clouseau-like response to the above committed grievances and their Barney Fife articulation of our constitutional principles as it relates to their sworn duties therein. What most of us wouldn't give for a Republican Party that stood up against that tyranny spreading across our land. Maybe, like Mr. Magoo, they will stumble into some interdiction on our behalf. In Idaho, Republicans are resisting the booster shot being administered by the ultra-conservatives. Being for the most part traditional in temperament, they will survive and be stronger because, unlike Democrats, no one here wants the patient's demise. At this point, it's pretty straightforward. With Republicans, it's a fever and an itch. With Democrats, flatline. That was written by Larry Burden of Downey. And Larry, that is very well constructed, very well written. I wish I had read it as well as you wrote it, but thank you. That was a very good piece of work, and we appreciate having the opportunity to read that. All right. Well, let's get to the files here, the video files, and as I said, we're going to do a little reprise of what we've been talking about. What we're talking about really is why did we have this so-called Vote Yes Pocatello action? Why did Vote Yes Pocatello fight so hard with such little resource against a monster machine that spent $156,000, could have been spent in other areas perhaps more productively, if not as effectively? Why did they fare Pocatello, the homosexual community, why did they spend $156,000. And why am I the most reviled man in the homosexual community? I don't name call, I don't cast aspersions, I simply report. I usually use the words from the very people who are touting the homosexual lifestyle. But I digress. Are we ready on that, Josh? All right, please pay attention to this. This is a reprise, and we'll talk about it afterwards.
Growing controversy over the case of a staunchly Christian wedding photographer and her decision to refuse a job at a same-sex ceremony because of her faith. Elaine Huguenin and her husband say accepting the job would have been in conflict with their rights to practice their religion. But after the New Mexico Supreme Court ruled that their decision amounted to a case of discrimination, sounds like they've decided to take the fight even higher. Jordan Lawrence is senior counsel for the Alliance Defending Freedom and is representing the Huguenins in this case. Jordan, good to see you today.
Shannon, good to be here. Appreciate all your work and reporting at the Supreme Court.
Well, and this case may end up there. Let's start,
That's
though, with
right.
what you got from the New Mexico Supreme Court. Basically said in the opinions and concurrences, one of the bottom lines was, this is the price of citizenship. You have a right to practice your religion, but when it discriminates against someone else, it's the price of being a U.S. citizen.
Yeah, the price of citizenship does not mean giving up your constitutional rights. It is shocking to think that an artist or any American can be forced by the government to promote messages that they don't agree with. And it raises the question after a decision like this, do we as Americans have the right to live free of this kind of government restraint and coercion?
Well, and I want to read another part of this because so many parts of the opinion raise a lot of questions. The concurring judge in writing, Richard Boston, I believe is the justice here, he said that the Huguenins, the couple here, have to channel their conduct, not their beliefs, so as to leave space for other Americans who believe something different. What about the Huguenins?
Well, that's exactly right. In a free society, people of different beliefs have to learn how to get along. There were plenty of photographers available willing to shoot this same-sex ceremony. They got them. The Huguenots just need to be excused. This can't be used in an authoritarian, coercive way to force people to basically promote the messages that they don't agree with.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I know at the lower court level, at least at one point, the Huguenins not only were found that they violated this human rights law in New Mexico, but also ordered to pay nearly $7,000 in attorney's fees to the couple who took them to court.
That is correct. And even though they were able to get photographs of their wedding that they were very satisfied with, they still wanted to send a message and make an example of Elaine Photography and John and Elaine Huguenin.
Okay, so the bigger question here, you mentioned they found another photographer for their ceremony.
Yes.
There were plenty of others who are happy to photograph any ceremony, any situation. Right. But this couple has very specific objections because of their very deeply held personal beliefs. Do you think that there is a political move afoot here? Because this couple was very happy to find another photographer who did photographs I understand that they like. I know in New Mexico there is a big push on several fronts to have gay marriage legalized there. And that's something the voters or the lawmakers there will have to decide. But do you think that this particular case is not just about the photography, but it's about the bigger political goals?
Well, I think that it is. And I think throughout U.S. history, we have seen those in power, those promoting a prevailing orthodoxy, tend to want to silence those that disagree with them. And that's why the founders put the First Amendment in, to prevent the government from trying to silence or muzzle those that disagree with their opinions. And this is, to me, a clear overreach of government power. The New Mexico Supreme Court got it wrong, and that's why we're seriously considering taking this up to the U.S. Supreme Court.
All right, I want to read another bit of the concurring opinion here. It said, but when actions, even religiously inspired, conflict with other constitutionally protected rights, there must be some accommodation. What is the constitutionally protected right here? Because she wasn't performing weddings. She wasn't, which is not legal in New Mexico anyway. I mean, she was asked to photograph a commitment ceremony. Is it the constitutional right to photographs? I seriously am confused by what the judge is referencing there.
Well, I'm not exactly sure either. That, I mean, generally people, and I understand that there's public accommodation laws so that people can do business without being discriminated against. But these laws cannot be used in a way that force people to advocate ideas that they disagree with. There's certain professions that are different than a restaurant or a hotel that basically promote messages, a videographer, a speechwriter, a photographer, and to force them to say, you have to do things and promote messages with your skills that you disagree with. I think that's a right that's all Americans are protected by. And those who object or support this decision and object to what Elaine Photography did must realize that there will be a day where they will find themselves in the same seat as Elaine Photography saying, I in good conscience cannot participate in this event. And there will be no constitutional protection unless the United States Supreme Court comes in and reverses this decision.
All right. Well, if you decide to take it there, let us know. We'll see you there. Jordan, thank you.
Thank you, Shannon.
This is my treasure. I have one for Brenton and New Haven, Missouri, and Edison, Pennsylvania, Birmingham, Alabama. This one is from Sri Lanka, India, and it was a minister who was on a train who met an American who had an article about Arlene's flowers. He calls every week and just says, how are you doing, sister? And then I got the Bible from a church in Yakima that came down, and they came to the shop and just said they were behind us and that they were thinking of us, and very, very special. You just want to do something out of the ordinary, something that tickles somebody's fancy or makes them smile or whatever. Just get these ideas in your head, and you really can't describe them. You know, I don't have a theory about it or anything. I just do it. Well, I think most artistic people, you know, especially painters, I think they put their heart into their arrangements. It's part of them. It's part of who they are. And I think that's the same thing with a florist. The joy of being here so long is you get to know people personally. I don't consider the people that walk in the door customers. They're just people that want something to please somebody else, and that's my job.
She is the most kind, gentlest soul you'll ever meet. If you go into her shop, you're going to get a hug. And so she's very warm. And she had established a really warm relationship with Rob Ingersoll, who had been in 9 years and would come in and spend a good amount of money throughout the year. And they had gotten to know each other pretty well.
He has a very creative mind, and so we just sort of hit it off.
At one point, he decided to get married a few months after same-sex marriage became legal in Washington State. And he, of course, wanted her to do it.
There was a real struggle to decide what to do with that. My husband and I talked it over, and, you know, as much as I love Rob, I just couldn't be a part of that. If I did Rob's wedding, it would be from my heart, because I think he's a really special person, and I would want to make it really special for him. So it wasn't something that I flippantly said, oh, I'm not going to do Rob's wedding because he's gay. When I talked to Rob, I did not think this would be a major issue. I was very surprised at that.
The Attorney General's action in this case is unprecedented in Washington State. We have never had an Attorney General take the position that this Attorney General is taking. Now the ACLU's piled on, and the same-sex couple have sued her as well. And interestingly, they have sued her in her personal capacity as well as her business. So she is at great risk. As a result of serving someone lovingly and admittedly in a kind way for 9 years, and because you won't do one same-sex wedding, you're going to lose your house or your business. And she's been working in this business for 40 years. I've read a lot of hate mail over the years, but what I've read in this case just is stunning. It makes you sick to your stomach when just volumes after volumes, thousands of pages.
People are filled with hate and refuse to even listen to what the real story is and how angry and frustrated, and it's just so sad.
This is about marriage. It's not about bigotry. She knew of their relationship. She provided flowers that they sent to each other. But when it came to marriage, that was the line. Because as she'll tell you, marriage represents the relationship of Christ and his church. It's a sacred covenant.
Marriage is a sacred, very sacred thing. If you want flowers for your anniversary, your birthday, or whatever, that's fine. But I just cannot do a same-sex marriage.
So this case in particular is coercing someone to engage in expression, and that's against America's tradition, and it's unconstitutional. It's also unnecessary. There are lots of florists. If you look in the Tri-Cities area, there's like 3 pages in the yellow pages of florists that could have served this couple. They've even admitted that after they received enough offers for free wedding arrangements to do 20 different weddings. But yet, what's being set up here is that's not good enough. It's not good enough that there are other florists. We have to coerce everyone to do what we want them to do, even if it violates religious convictions.
I have to have faith that he's going to protect me and give me the courage and the knowledge and the wisdom to stand firm on this. But it's also helped me understand what obedience is and what I'm going to cry and what following Christ is. You know, you can't sit on the fence, like he says. You can't be lukewarm. And that's what I was. I was lukewarm. Baronelle, God bless you, sister. We are all praying for you. Stand with you 100%, Pastor Tony. God will hold your hand no matter what. God bless Opal. I will certainly continue to pray for you and thank you for your commitment. Lord bless Dan Greer. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. God bless you, Cheryl Sampson. Rest in Jesus, you're a daughter of the King. That one got me. May God's strength be with you, praying for you, Dave and family. Hope all goes well. Just remember God loves you. Charity Castro.
Ryan Anderson.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here today. I just want to make clear I'm speaking in my personal capacity here today, but for identification purposes, I'm the William E. Simon Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, which is a nonpartisan think tank in Washington, D.C. I'm also a doctoral candidate at the University of Notre Dame in political science. And I'll be speaking from that perspective of political science, from the perspective of philosophy and social science, really answering the question of what is marriage. I've co-authored a book and an article that was in the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy. You're being distributed copies of that book with a classmate of mine from Princeton, where I was an undergraduate, and with a professor of ours of constitutional law at Princeton, Robert George. We then filed amicus briefs with the 9th, the 10th, and the First Circuit courts, and with the U.S. Supreme Court. The title of that book, the title of that Harvard article is What is Marriage? The answer to that question is something we didn't hear today from people on the other side. It's interesting that we've had a 3-hour conversation about marriage without much by way of answering of that question. Everyone in this room is in favor of marriage equality. The only way we can know whether or not any given state law is treating marriage equally or not is if we know what a marriage is. Because every state law will draw lines between what is a marriage and what isn't a marriage. If we want those lines to be drawn on principle, if we want those lines to be drawn on the truth, we have to know what sort of a relationship a marriage is as compared to other forms of consenting, adult, loving relationships. So in the time I have today, I'll just answer 3 questions. What is marriage? Why does marriage matter for public policy? And then what are the consequences of redefining marriage? Marriage exists to unite a man and a woman as husband and wife to then be equipped to be mother and father to any children that that union produces. It's based on the biological fact that men and women are distinct and complementary. It's based on the anthropological truth that reproduction requires a man and a woman. It's based on the social reality that children deserve a mother and a father. Whenever a child is born, a mother will always be close by. That's a fact of biology. The question for culture and the question for law is, will a father be close by? And if so, for how long? Marriage is the institution that different cultures and societies across time and place developed to maximize the likelihood that that man commits to that woman, and then the two of them take responsibility to raise that child. Part of this is based on the reality there's no such thing as parenting in the abstract. There's mothering and there's fathering. Men and women bring different gifts to the parenting enterprise. Rutgers sociologist Professor David Popenoe writes, quote, "The burden of social science evidence supports the idea that gender differentiating parenting is important for human development, and the contribution of fathers to child rearing is unique and irreplaceable." He then concludes, quote, "We should disavow the notion that mommies can make good daddies, just as we should disavow the popular notion that daddies can make good mommies. The two sexes are different to the core, and each is necessary, culturally and biologically, for the optimal development of a human being." This is why, when we look at the map with all of the states, so many states have continued to define marriage as the union of a man and a woman, many doing so by amending their constitution. The impact of marriage. So why does marriage matter for public policy? Perhaps there's no better way to analyze this than looking to our own president, President Barack Obama. Let me quote, "We know the statistics that children who grow up without a father are 5 times more likely to live in poverty and commit crime, 9 times more likely to drop out of schools, and 20 times more likely to end up in prison. They are more likely to have behavioral problems or run away from home or become teenage parents themselves. And the foundation of our community are weaker because of it." There's a host of social science evidence. We go through the litany and we cite all of the studies, chapters and verse in the book that you've been distributed. But President Obama sums it up very well. What we've seen in the past 50 years, since the war on poverty began, is that the family has collapsed. At one point in America, virtually every child was given the gift of a married mother and father. Those numbers right now, it's more than 50% of Hispanic children are born outside of wedlock. More than 70% of African Americans are born outside of wedlock. And the consequences for those children are really serious. The state's interest in marriage is not that it cares about my love life or your love life or anyone's love life just for the sake of romance. The state's interest in marriage is ensuring that those kids have fathers who are involved in their lives. And so what we saw was that this was when the welfare state took off. This is when all of the welfare spending that bankrupts so many states and the federal government took off. It's when crime increased. It's when child poverty for those children increased. It's when social mobility decreased. So everything that you can care about, if you're someone who cares about social justice and limited government, if you care about freedom and liberty and you care about the poor, is better served by having the state define marriage correctly to ensure that men and women commit to each other and take responsibility for their children, while then leaving other consenting adults free to live and to love how they choose, without redefining the institution, the fundamental institution of marriage. One thing I will add to that is that insofar as there are debates, we've already mentioned hospital visitation, which the federal government has already addressed. We can mention inheritance laws. Every individual has those concerns. I am not married. When I get sick, I need someone to visit me in the hospital. When I die, I need someone to inherit my wealth. That situation is not unique to a same-sex couple. That is a situation that matters for all of us, and so we need not redefine marriage to craft policy that will serve all citizens. Lastly, I'll close with 3 things about how redefining marriage will undermine the institution of marriage. You hear this question, how does redefining marriage hurt you or your marriage? I'll just mention 3 in the remaining time that I have. First, it fundamentally reorients the institution of marriage away from the needs and the rights of children and towards the desires of adults. It no longer makes marriage primarily about ensuring the type of family life that's ideal for kids. It makes it more about adult romance. If the biggest social problem we face right now in the United States is absentee dads, how will we insist that fathers are essential when the law redefines marriage to make fathers optional? Much of the testimony we heard today was about the special interest pleading of big business, wanting to appeal to the elite college graduates from the East and the West Coast. We heard no discussion about the citizens of Indiana, the children who need fathers involved in their lives. Redefining marriage would make it much harder for the law to teach that those fathers are essential. Second, if you redefine marriage so as to say that the male-female aspect of marriage is irrational and arbitrary, what principle, for policy and for law, will retain the other three historic components of marriage? In the United States, it's always been a monogamous union, a sexually exclusive union, and a permanent union. And we've already seen new words created to challenge each and every one of those items. Throuple is a three-person couple. New York Magazine reports that. It's in the book. Here's the question. If I were to sue and say, I demand marriage equality for my throuple, what principle would deny marriage equality to the throuple once you say that male and female is irrational and arbitrary? The way that we got to monogamy, the way that we got to the number 2, was that it's one man and one woman who can unite in the type of action that can create new life and who can provide that new life with one mom and one dad. Once you say that is irrational and arbitrary and nothing except hate and bigotry and animus, the way that the other side has consistently demonized those on my side, you will have no principled reason in law or in culture or in policy to retain the number 2. Likewise, the term wed lease has been developed. A wed lease is a play on the term wedlock. It's for a temporary marriage union. If marriage is primarily about adult romance, romance can come and it can go. Why should the law presume it to be permanent? And then lastly, the term monogamish. Wed lease was introduced in the Washington Post in 2013. Monogamish was introduced in the New York Times in 2011. And it said, no, we should retain the number 2, but they should be sexually open relationships. That it should just be 2 people getting married, but they should be free to have sex outside of marriage, provided there's no coercion or deceit. Now, whatever you think about group marriage, whatever you think about temporary marriage, whatever you think about sexually open marriage, as far as adults living and loving how they choose, think about the social consequences if that's the direction, the slippery slope in which marriage redefinition would go. For every additional sexual partner I have, and for the shorter lived those relationships are, the greater the chances that I create children with multiple women without commitment either to those mothers or to those kids. It increases the likelihood of creating fragmented families, and then big government will step in to pick up the pieces with a host of welfare programs that truly drain the economic prospects of all of our states. Finally, I'll mention liberty concerns, religious liberty in particular. We saw in Massachusetts, we saw in Washington, D.C., where I currently live, and we saw your neighbor, Illinois, after they passed either civil union laws or redefinition of marriage laws, that Christian, Catholic, and evangelical adoption agencies were forced to stop serving some of the most neediest children in America, orphans. These agencies said, we have no problem with same-sex couples adopting from other agencies, but we only want to place our children with a married mom and a dad. We have religious liberty interests. We also have social science that suggests children do best with a married mom and dad. In all 3 jurisdictions, they were told they could not do that. So what's at stake here, and we've also seen in different jurisdictions instances of photographers and bakers and florists and innkeepers, people acting in the commercial sphere who say, we don't want to be coerced. And that's what redefining marriage would do. Redefining marriage would say that every institution has to treat 2 people of the same sex as if they're married, even if those institutions don't believe that they're married. So the coercion works in the exact opposite direction of what we frequently have heard. Everyone right now is free to live and to love how they want. You can work for a business that will give you marriage benefits if the business chooses to. You can go to a liberal house of worship and have a marriage ceremony if the house of worship chooses to. What would be at stake with redefining marriage is whether or not the law would now coerce these institutions into treating a same-sex relationship as if it's a marriage, even when it violates the conscience and the rights of those individuals in those institutions. So for all of those reasons, this is why the state and all states have an interest in preserving the definition of marriage as a union permanent and exclusive of a man and a woman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
First on Fox Tonight, a local baker says he has the right to deny a same-sex couple a wedding cake. But now the Attorney General's office is investigating the Gresham business. KPTV's Laura Rios talked to the baker and joins us live from Gresham with the details. Laura?
Shauna, Oregon law prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation, but Aaron Klein of Sweet Cakes Bakery tells me he believes he is within his rights to refuse to make a cake for a same-sex wedding.
I have one of those.
Aaron Klein stays busy making sales at Sweet Cakes, the Gresham bakery he runs with his wife, except when he has a reason not to.
I've been cleaned out.
A complaint filed with Oregon's Department of Justice alleges Klein turned customers away for a different reason. They wanted to buy a cake for a same-sex marriage. According to the complaint, Klein called the couple, quote, abominations unto the Lord, then said their money was, quote, not equal.
I never told anybody they were an abomination.
Klein denies he made those statements, but admits he did turn one of the brides-to-be and her mother away.
She, being the girl, giggled a little bit and said, it's two brides. At that point, I stopped what I was doing. I looked at them. I said, I'm sorry. May have wasted your time. We don't do same-sex marriages.
From the Bible on the counter to the faith decoration on the wall, Klein and his wife make their religious beliefs well known to customers. The bakery's website says they, quote, strongly believe that when a man and woman come together to be joined as one, it's truly one of the most special days of their lives. And while Oregon law prohibits discrimination based on sexual orientation, Klein says his beliefs protect him.
First Amendment, Constitution, freedom of religion. I'm free to exercise my religion however I see fit. I should not be compelled to violate my conscience. If I am told that I have to make a wedding cake for a same-sex marriage, I feel that I'm violating my beliefs. I don't think I should have to do that.
Klein is willing to accept the consequences, whether that means losing business or getting into trouble with the state.
I'd rather stand up for what I believe in and what I feel is right and get totally annihilated when it comes in the end than to bow down to this and say, go ahead, because that sets the standard for the next one and the next one and the next one.
Now, the couple who filed this complaint referred me to their attorney. He declined to comment tonight. Now, the Department of Justice, is waiting for Klein to respond to this complaint in writing, and after that, they will decide whether or not to continue this investigation. Reporting live in Gresham, I'm Laura Rios, the 10 o'clock news.
In a similar case, the owner of a flower shop in Richland, Washington, is being sued because of her Christian beliefs. Baronelle Stutzman has owned Arlene's Flowers for decades. But when asked to sell flowers to a gay couple for their wedding, she declined, saying it was against her Christian beliefs. She's now being taken to court over the matter, and she spoke exclusively with CBN News about the matter.
You have to make a stand somewhere in your life on what you believe and what you don't believe. And it was just a time that I had to take a stand. And everybody will have to come to that same time in their business.
Interesting. Well, lawyers tell CBN News this case has the makings of one that could go all the way to the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court. Our David Brody will have a complete report on this story coming soon on the 700 Club.
The push for radical transgender rights in schools is trumping privacy rights. A boy in a Colorado high school who claims to be a transgender has been harassing girls in the bathroom. When parents complained, school officials said the boy's rights as a transgender trumped their daughter's privacy rights. Some students were threatened with being kicked off athletic teams or charged with hate crimes if they continued to voice concerns. The Pacific Justice Institute sent a letter to the school warning against squelching privacy rights.
Baker standing by his controversial conviction.
He refused to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding. Now the Department of Justice is looking into a complaint filed by one of the brides-to-be. The Night Team's Mike Benner is live at the bakery tonight. Mike?
You know, Joe, this story is already getting national attention. One of the owners of the bakery you see behind me here is a guy by the name of Aaron Klein. He told us he was contacted by a publication in Washington, D.C. He will tell them, like he told us, that he believes a marriage is between a man and a woman and nobody else.
This is, I believe a 5-year-old girl's birthday.
Aaron Klein and his wife have run Sweet Cakes by Melissa for about 8 years, and Aaron will tell you it's been an absolute joy.
We get to be a part of a lot of people's special day.
And it was a special day indeed that brought a mother and daughter into the Gresham Bakery on January 17th.
Cream cheese frosting.
The pair was looking for the perfect wedding cake.
My first question is, what's the wedding date? And next question is usually bride and groom's first names. The girl giggled a little bit said, actually, it's 2 brides.
Aaron apologized to the women and told them he and his wife don't do cakes for same-sex marriages. He says they were disgusted by the explanation and walked out.
I believe that marriage is a religious institution ordained by God. The book of Genesis talks about that. For this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and cleave to his wife. That, to me, is the beginning, the basis of marriage.
At the request of their attorney, the women aren't talking, but it would appear they have plenty of support. All you have to do is look at the Sweet Cakes by Melissa Facebook page. One woman writes, "Jesus says to love, you've spread hate." Another, "How sad for you to embrace hatred, bigotry, and discrimination." And a third, "Shame." What Aaron wants to make clear is that he and his wife don't hate homosexuals. In fact, quite the opposite.
I have no problem with them. I have customers that come in almost on a weekly basis that are homosexual. I have no problem. They can buy my stuff. I sell stuff. I talk with them. I mean, that's fine.
What's not fine, according to Aaron, is a marriage between people of the same sex. He says he'll always stand by that conviction.
I'd rather have my kids see their dad stand up for what he believed in than to see him bow down because one person complained.
Now, the state law in question here prohibits discrimination in places of public accommodation without any distinction, discrimination, or restriction on account of race, color, religion, sex, and sexual orientation. Now, the Department of Justice sent a copy of the complaint to Aaron and his wife, and they have 2 weeks to respond. Back to you.
Thank you, Mike. And this story is getting quite a response on our Facebook page. We receive hundreds of comments in just more than an hour. So should the bakery have the right to refuse service to same-sex couples looking for wedding cakes? That was our question. Lindsay says, "I don't think they can legally refuse service because someone or a couple is gay, just like we can't discriminate against someone's race or sex." Brady says everyone is all about teaching kids about how bad bullying is, yet adults turn around and try to bully businesses to go against their beliefs. If you'd like to share your comments, just log on to KGW.com. You can also log on to our Facebook page. Just search KGW TV.
The Washington State Attorney General has filed a consumer protection action against a florist who refused to provide flowers for a same-sex ceremony. The florist told a longtime customer it's, quote, because of her relationship with Jesus Christ. Dana Rebick of our Seattle Fox affiliate has more.
Baronelle Stutzman has made bouquets for hundreds of weddings, but has only ever turned down one.
Before he got all the way through, I grabbed his hand and I said, "I'm sorry, I can't do your wedding because of my relationship with Jesus Christ."
After being denied, Robert Ingersoll and his partner took their story online, and it quickly went viral. The Attorney General's office got wind of it, and 2 weeks ago sent this letter to Stutzman, warning her that not providing flowers for the couple is a violation of the state's anti-discrimination law.
There's someone who has fairly blatantly denied service to a gay couple because of their sexual orientation. I don't think there's any dispute that but for the fact that they were gay, she'd be happy to provide wedding services.
State Representative Jamie Peterson was the co-sponsor of last year's gay marriage bill and says the legislature did debate this issue and decided to carve out an exemption for religious institutions only.
We did specifically decline to do that for florists. That was a feature of the campaign. The opponents to Referendum 74 talked about.
A transgender woman says she is being discriminated against after using the women's locker room at Evergreen State College. The problem is she's still technically a male, and young high school girls from Olympia use the same locker room. KIRO 7's Deborah Horn is live with how the school district is trying to make both sides happy here. Deborah.
Angela, we found out about this in an email from a mother angry that this is happening. But the person at the center of this controversy says she is being discriminated against. Forced to leave a facility she has a legal right to use.
I looked at her and said, "Excuse me?" And she said, "You have to leave. I'll be right back."
Colleen Francis says she was using the sauna and women's locker room inside the recreation center at Evergreen State College 2 Wednesdays ago. The same facilities used by 2 female high school swim teams from Olympia who practice in this pool. A woman told Francis to leave.
She wouldn't identify herself. All she said was that there were a couple of girls that came upstairs to the pool and said that there's a man in the sauna.
But Frances, who acknowledges she was born a man, says she has lived as a woman since 2009. Still, someone called campus police, and local parents got wind of it.
They're uncomfortable with him being in there, her being in there, and they are a bit shocked by it.
Christy Holterman's daughter was one of the swimmers. Holterman complained to Evergreen. College officials tell us they have been working with the Olympia School District, which leases space at the pool. But state law requires equal access to state facilities regardless of sexual orientation. So local school officials tell us they came up with a temporary solution.
There's a smaller private locker room next to the main locker room there at the pool, and they've been using that.
But Frances says she believes the students need an education.
This is not 1959 Alabama. We don't call the police for drinking from the wrong water fountain.
But the mother we talked to says what is paramount to her is that her teenage daughter and her teammates have a safe, comfortable place to swim. We'll let you know when school officials find a permanent solution.
Well, there you have it. That's kind of a reprise of why we got into this mess in the first place, why we started fighting against the so-called non-discrimination ordinance. And it doesn't take rocket science for most of us to associate our reasons for thinking that this is bad law. The non-discrimination ordinance is bad law. However, it is law, and it apparently is going to remain law, so we're stuck with it. But you don't have to be stuck with giving up your rights if you disagree with things that you've seen here. There is something you should read. If you haven't read it already, I've shared it with you before, but I would suggest that you read The Overhauling of Straight America by Marshall Kirk and Erastus Pill. I don't think Erastus Pill is his real name. I think that's a pseudonym. The Overhauling of a Straight America. Now you may wonder, all the things I've told you to read, and where are you going to, so what? What are you going to do with it? Well, you have to, if you're going to protect yourself or you're going to protect your family or your business, and let me make sure you understand something. I don't have a business. I don't have any rentals. I'm not going to be directly, or perhaps not even indirectly, affected by this so-called non-discrimination ordinance. Property owners are. Eventually it's going to happen. You're going to be, sooner or later, you're going to wind up on the wrong side of the non-discrimination ordinance. But anyway, you have to educate yourself, and so I would suggest The Overhauling of Straight America. And let me just share one portion of this document with you. This is basically a how to gain universal acceptance of the homosexual lifestyle and make anybody who has the temerity to stand up against it the enemy. This is number 2 in their list of things, called portray gays as victims, not as aggressive challengers. In any campaign to win over the public, gays must be cast as victims in need of protection, so that straights will be inclined by reflex to assume the role of protector. If gays are presented instead as a strong and prideful tribe, promoting a rigidly nonconformist and deviant lifestyle, they are more likely to be seen as a public menace that justifies resistance and oppression. For that reason, we must forego the temptation to strut our gay pride publicly when it conflicts with gay victim image. And we must walk the fine line between impressing straights with our great numbers on the one hand and sparking their hostile paranoia, they are all around us, on the other hand. A media campaign to promote the gay victim image should make use of symbols which reduce the mainstream's sense of threat, which lower its guard, and which enhance the plausibility of victimization. It always goes without saying that groups on the farthest margin of acceptability, such as NAMBLA, NAMBLA's North American Man-Boy Love Association, these are pedophiles that seek out young boys and want to make it legal, must play no part at all in such a campaign. Suspected child molesters will never look like victims. Now, there are two different messages about the gay victim that are worth communicating. First, the mainstream should be told that gays are victims of fate, in the sense that most never had a choice to accept or reject their sexual preference. The message must read, as far as gays can tell, they were born gay, just as you were born heterosexual, or white, or black, or bright, or athletic. Nobody ever tricked or seduced them. They never made a choice and are not morally blameworthy. What they do isn't willfully contrary, it's only natural for them. This twist of fate could be as easily have happened to you. Straight viewers must be able to identify with gays as victims. Mr. and Mrs. Public must be given no extra excuses to say they are not like us. In any campaign to win over the public, gays must be cast as victims in need of protection, so that straights will be inclined by reflex to assume the role of protector. And that, my friends, is basically non-discrimination ordinance. A media campaign, this is number 3, a media campaign casts gays as society's victims and encourages straights to be their protectors must make it easier for them to respond to assert and explain their new protectiveness. Few straight women and even fewer straight men will want to defend homosexuality boldly as such. Most would rather attach their awakened protective impulse to some principle of justice or law, to some general desire for consistent and fair treatment in society. Our campaign should not demand direct support for homosexual practices, should instead take anti-discrimination as its theme. Sound familiar? It is especially important for the gay movement to hitch its cause to accepted standards of law and justice, because its straight supporters must have at hand a cogent reply to the moral arguments of its enemies. The homophobes clothe their emotional revulsion in the daunting robes of religious dogma, so defenders of gay rights must be ready to counter dogma with principle. Number 4, make gays look good. In order to make a gay victim sympathetic to straights, you have to portray him as every man. But an additional theme of the campaign should be more aggressive and upbeat, to offset the increasingly bad press that these times have brought to homosexual men and women. The campaign should paint gays as superior pillars of society. Yes, yes, we know this trick is so old it creaks. And then it goes on telling their adherents how to get on television, how to get in radio, get into movies. Well, that doesn't cover all of it, but we don't have time to read the whole thing. This is The Overhauling of Straight America by Marshall Kirk and Erastus Pill. These are homosexuals themselves. These are not my words. I'm reading from their publication. So don't just take it from Ralph Lillig. Look it up. The Overhauling of Straight America. Has the vilification of Ralph Lillig by the homosexual community worked? Well, perhaps it has with a lot of people. It's interesting that there's not one person in the homosexual community that knows me. All they know is what I say. All they know is my reputation, and they've never heard me say anything other than what they say themselves from their own publications. I've never called them names. I've never cast aspersions. I've never said I hate them. In fact, I don't hate anybody, and I've told you that before. So you need to better understand, how did I get into this in the first place? Because bad law is bad law, and you have a right to stand up and be counted if you think a bad law needs to be redressed. So I would urge you, don't just sweep this under the carpet. Study it. Find out more about it, and teach your children why this is not good for America, why this is not good for the family. Teach yourself. And in the meantime, that's about it for this week. It's been kind of an eclectic, bounced around kind of show, I know that. Hopefully we'll be a little more organized next week, and we won't wear this test pattern. In the meantime, God bless you. Have a good, safe week. Hopefully you'll tune in next Wednesday at 8:30, same time, same station. Have fun out there. See you next week.